First up, cutting across to breaking news coming in, Supreme Court today has delivered its judgment on a bunch of petitions seeking an investigation into allegations of accounting fraud and stock manipulation against Adani Group of companies. Published in a research report by US short seller Hindenburg Research in January 2023, Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud pronounced the verdict in the case that was reserved on the 24th of November after the conclusion of arguments. Top Court has said that it cannot enter into the domain of the regulatory regime and that the report by Hindenburg or anything like that cannot become the basis of a separate probe. It also directed SEBI, that is Securities and Exchange Board of India, to go ahead and continue its probe as per the law. Cutting across to Shavan, who's tracking all the details on the same. Shavan, it is a big relief to the Adani Group from the top court, and most importantly, SEBI now continues with the probe.
Well, undoubtedly, it's a big blow to the petitioners who were seeking an independent probe into the matter. In fact, the Supreme Court has categorically said that there would be no independent investigation. The matter will not be transferred from the SEBI to an SIT. The reason essentially being, and let's just take our viewers through the latest developments coming in from the Supreme Court, a big win for the Adani Group of companies. Remember, there has been a massive jump as far as the share prices are concerned, roughly a jump of 10% that we're looking at in this morning. There was an anticipation that perhaps this is going to be a favorable verdict, given the fact that while hearing this entire matter, the Supreme Court had orally remarked that, there were no reason why they would essentially doubt the investigation that was being carried out by SEBI. Now, let's take our viewers through the latest developments in terms of what has happened so far. There were a batch of about multiple petitions which were basically seeking an independent investigation, in fact, casting aspersions on the investigation that was being carried out by SEBI. So much so, they said that there was a clear conflict of interest. That has now been rejected by the court. So that's undoubtedly the big takeaway. In a short while from now, perhaps, Suesha will take our viewers through the key takeaways of this verdict and also put this into perspective, because remember, in the last few months itself, apart from Hindenburg itself, you had other multiple reports, newspaper reports, as well as those which with some vested interest putting out casting aspersions on the SEBI to begin with, and secondly, to also raise questions about the committee that was set up by the Supreme Court. This was after the petition that was filed in the court after the Hindenburg report came in sometime in January last year, and a verdict was also given by the Supreme Court that a Supreme Court appointed committee would be looking into the allegations, and thereafter also the fact of the matter is that SEBI was looking into the matter. As of now, as it stands today, that of the 22 matters that were being probed by SEBI, 20 matters have already been completed. Supreme Court has now instructed SEBI to complete the matter in the next 3 months. What does this essentially mean? Let's also look at some of the allegations that have been leveled against the Adani Group of companies. The allegation was of share manipulation, something that in a 413-page rebuttal put out by the Adani Group of companies, they said that these were completely malicious. Thereafter, reports also came in of the George Soros link that was emerging, and the fact of the matter is that there was a deliberate attempt that was made to perhaps ensure that the Adani Group of companies faces massive losses. And that is exactly what happened soon after that report was published by the US short seller, where we saw there was a massive loss that was incurred by the Adani Group of companies. But thereafter, the funds that were largely raised through equity did actually see the Adani Group of companies not only springing back, but also right now, if you really take a look at how they have been able to keep the companies not only afloat, but the very fact several of these companies have seen a massive jump in terms of their share prices. But also, take a look at what has really happened in the last few months. Despite the report being completely rejected, you did have a third party, OCCPR, raising questions about the investigation that was being carried out by SEBI. In fact, they also made the allegation that there was a direct conflict of interest, which the Supreme Court today, Suesha, has made it abundantly clear that there is no proof to that extent that they were compromised, and the fact that whether that should be taken away from SEBI and an independent probe should be carried out. So this verdict makes it very clear that it is SEBI that would be looking into. And in fact, as far as the legal framework of the SEBI is concerned, to which also the Supreme Court today actually remarked, and let me just quote as far as what the Chief Justice of India had to say. The power of this court to enter the regulatory framework of SEBI is limited. No valid grounds were raised to direct SEBI to revoke its amendments. The regulations do not suffer any infirmities. Now, that's exactly what the Supreme Court had to say. So this comes across as a big win, as a big relief for the Adani group of companies. In a short while from now, we are expecting that there would be a response coming in from the Adani group of companies. In fact, so far no statement has been put out, but looking at this judgment, which has been favorable for the group, it is expected that they would be responding in a short while from now. We've also reached out to the Adani group of companies for their first statement on this entire matter, which comes across as a big relief to them.
Shravan, let's also not forget how the opposition also took up the Hindenburg report in a huge way. In fact, also making it a point against the ruling party, saying and alleging that the ruling party has been favoring the Adani group of companies. But in that sense of how doubts were raised to whether SEBI or the government of India would carry a fair probe and be able to get into the depth of this. So while they continue to express such doubts, it is the top court making it amply clear that we have faith in our regulator, and it is SEBI and the government of India that will look into the depth of these allegations that have been levelled.
For starters, Suesha, let's look at the allegations that have been levelled against the Adani group of companies soon after that report that was published in January 2023. The allegation was of jacking up the share prices and also using offshore accounts. Of course, thereafter, there have been multiple reports that came in with regards to the fact that SEBI too, during its preliminary investigation, did not really come across anything to suggest that there was short selling that was essentially done by the Adani group of companies. But however, having said that, remember the SEBI too has said that some of these transactions are complicated in nature, for which multiple extensions were sought by SEBI. The report was initially supposed to come in within a month or two, but a 6-month extension was actually taken by SEBI, and sometime in the month of August, on the 14th of August, when they had taken another 15 days of extension. Now, it does appear, with the SEBI almost giving a clean sheet to the group at this point in time, has been some sort of a relief for them. But a total clean sheet is yet to come in, because the probe hasn't been completed. As in the Supreme Court, there was a mention, they had also made a mention of that of the 22 matters, 20 have already been completed. The Supreme Court today makes a point that within about 3 months itself, they will have to complete the entire investigation. Now, that is the authority. That is exactly what is going to be looked at. Now, there are a few other aspects that are emerging right now. Number one, the Chief Justice of India has said that the government of India and SEBI to look into if there is any infraction of law by the Hindenburg report on short selling, and if so, take action in accordance with law. Because remember, there have also reports that have come in about the intention of the Hindenburg report, and more importantly, the George Soros link that has also come in. That is something that perhaps an indication now coming in. Supreme Court is asking the government to look into the Hindenburg malafide. If at all there is, then action should be taken. It needs to be investigated. So I would say, apart from the fact that they are talking about the fact that there would be no independent probe, the other aspect that really comes out from this verdict is the fact whether at all there were any malafide on the part of Hindenburg. If there is, then the Supreme Court has now instructed the government as well as the SEBI to look into these allegations, to look into this matter and take appropriate action. Let's not forget that if you take a look at the history of Hindenburg itself, the US short seller, it does appear that there has always been an attempt to bring down companies at a time when they were basically going public. More importantly, when they were basically raising more funds. And this entire timeline, the timing itself has also been questioned in the past. Let's not forget that the history of Hindenburg itself has been murky, and questions have not only been raised by companies here in India, but the United States of America, multiple companies have also said so. Remember, in the Sri Lankan container case too, where there were allegations leveled against the Adani group, the United States of America has also given a complete clean sheet. So much so, the borrowings that have actually taken place was a clear indication of the reaffirmation, the faith that was actually put into the Adani group of companies. And the fact of the matter is that they have seen a surge, not just here in India, but their activities across other countries too. Having said that, the allegations that have been leveled against the Adani group of companies, so far there has been no proof to that effect. SEBI too, in its preliminary report that has already been submitted, and some parts of it which has come out in public, goes on to only indicate the fact that none of these allegations that have been leveled against the group of companies in terms of a fair price manipulation have been able to establish. As far as the usage of offshore accounts are concerned, it is important to point out here that there were no credible allegations that have actually stuck to the company. Let me also bring in Mr. Kothari, who's joining us on this broadcast. Mr. Kothari, I would say that not only the fact that the court today is rejecting an independent probe, the very fact that the court has instructed the government and the SEBI to look into whether at all there have been any malafide intentions on the part of Hindenburg, the short seller, is something that should be probed. I would say that's the other big takeaway of this verdict.
In the sense that whenever a Supreme Court gives a judgment, it becomes the law of the land for other lower courts and for itself also to follow, unless it reverses itself with a bigger bench. So if today the court would have to said that, SEBI is not doing its job properly, let us put up an SIT, then that becomes a precedent for anybody in the future, any corporate person in the future to say, by the way, this thing is not going properly, or this judgment was not proper. So I think, an SIT should be formed and it should be reversing SEBI's report, or it should not be allowing SEBI to do its job. That way, the entire regulatory regime will come to a standstill, and any independence of any of these institutional authorities like SEBI, CBI, or any of those sort would become stultified completely and be rendered nugatory. So the thing is that when as a Supreme Court, when it sits over something like this, over a petition like this, saying that SEBI needs to pull up its socks, SEBI needs to be changed, the Supreme Court will always fight very chary of walking into those kind of uncharted waters, if I may say so, because it may feel that, first of all, it is not the Supreme Court's business to decide the regulatory regime or to decide the procedure. It is the job of the regulatory regime, such as the SEBI, the regulatory authority, to decide as to how it wants to proceed and what procedure it needs to follow, and that's been laid out by the SEBI Act and several other concomitant acts. So the thing is that the Supreme Court says that, first of all, it's not within my purview to get into that space. Second is that, yes, if you point out some malafides or compromised investigation on part of SEBI, then we may enter that issue, because everything of this nature is subject to judicial review, and judicial review forms part of the basic structure of the Constitution. So not even SEBI can come out and say and argue that, look, by the way, we're independent bodies and you're not supposed to get into our space. Sorry, we sit at the top of the judiciary, or any judiciary for that matter, any court, to the level of the High Court, can look into your report and look into this and decide whether or not you've committed any fraud in the first place, or whether you've compromised any investigation. So as far as this aspect is concerned, the Hindenburg allegations which have been made, that is only for the SEBI to decide. The Supreme Court is not well equipped to even go into that space. So what the court has done with this kind of a judgment, and one would like to read the entire judgment so that we get the reasoning, all the reasonings that I pointed out, and I'm sure there are more reasonings given by the Supreme Court, that it cannot come out with an arbitrary judgment itself also, because arbitrariness strikes itself at the root of Article 14, which is equality before the law. And the Supreme Court cannot violate that article itself when it's supposed to be a constitutional sentinel upholding Article 14. Because the SEBI could tomorrow come out and say that it was a very arbitrary, rash, brash judgment. And the Supreme Court should have not given that kind of a judgment. So Shravan and Suesha, let me tell you that all of these things, basically Hindenburg report and all of that, I'm not saying that that is the case, but sometimes there is tremendous corporate rivalry. Who engineers these kind of reports? What is the basis of this? What is the motive of this is not for far to seek for you and me. We've done several investigations and several debates together as far as this thing is concerned. So I'm not sure whether this is anything new. If I may put it very facetiously, it's an old wine in a new bottle.
And our top story in this edition, Supreme Court today delivered its judgment on a bunch of petitions seeking an investigation into allegations of accounting fraud and stock manipulation against Adani Group companies, published in a research report by US short seller Hindenburg Research in January 2023. Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud pronounced the verdict in the case that was reserved on the 24th of November after the conclusion of the arguments. The top court has said that it cannot enter into the domain of the regulatory regime and that the report by Hindenburg or anything like that, quote unquote, cannot become the basis of a separate probe. It also directed SEBI to go ahead and continue its probe as per the law. Listen into the voices coming in.
एसआईटी बनाने की मांग हमारी याचिका में नहीं थी, अन्य किसी याचिका में होगी तो उससे हमारा कोई संबंध नहीं है। एसआईटी अपने आप सेबी द्वारा बनाई गई थी और वो उस पर इन्वेस्टिगेशन कर रही है और हाल ही में सेबी की जो स्टेटस रिपोर्ट दी गई उसमें 22 इन्वेस्टिगेशंस कंप्लीट कर ली गई हैं, 2 आर पेंडिंग। तो 2 पर भी सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने 3 महीने का टाइम दिया है कि इनको कंप्लीट करें। तो सेबी द्वारा ऑलरेडी एसआईटी की गई है और वो अपनी इन्वेस्टिगेशन कर रही है, उसमें हस्तक्षेप का कोई अभी जो है ग्राउंड नहीं बनता।
It's a big relief for the Adani Group of companies as the Supreme Court of India has said that there is no ground to transfer the probe to an SIT, also saying that it is SEBI that will continue to look into the probe. Also, along with the Government of India, Supreme Court has told the government to look into Hindenburg Malified. CJI had said that the Government of India and SEBI are to look into if there is any infraction of law by the Hindenburg report on short selling, and if so, take action in accordance with the law. Swapnil Kothari will join us shortly as we put out details of the Adani-Hindenburg case verdict. Not just that, also how the stocks for Adani Power, Adani Port have also rallied as the verdict has now come in favor of the Adani Group of companies. They've also put out a tweet. This is the latest tweet by Gautam Adani that reads, and I quote, "The Honorable Supreme Court's judgment shows that truth has prevailed. Satyameva Jayate. I am grateful to those who have stood by us. Our humble contribution to India's growth story will continue." This is this first statement coming in from Gautam Adani after the Supreme Court's verdict, as I cut across to Swapnil Kothari, who's joining us live on the broadcast. Swapnil, this is big news coming in, and most importantly, how it also sets a precedent, because not only does the Supreme Court say that SEBI, the regulator, continues to probe into the matter, the Government of India also looks for Hindenburg Malified, but the very fact of how several entities and forces came together when the Hindenburg report came out, and the political angle that this entire story had also taken, in that sense, the Supreme Court now sets the record straight.
Yes, Suesha, as I said in my opening remarks, that it's either, if I should say that it's a corporate a subterfuge, or alternatively, it's some sort of trying an attempt to bring down the government and the image of India. So these are the only two things that I can come at. I don't think that Mr. Adani is responsible. If he is, then SEBI will come out with it accordingly. For any stock manipulation or anything of that sort, the SEBI will come out with that conclusion. I don't see SEBI being shunted or scared into or intimidated by anything of this nature. It's SEBI's job. It's a very, very fierce, independent body. True that there are at times when these regulatory institutions come under some sort of a fire or come under some, sort of a pressure. But I think given the fact that it's a corporate espionage, if at all, or if there is some corporate hanky-panky, then I don't see a reason why it should fight shy of anything of this nature to come out very objectively on this. Now, my basic also point is that, Suesha, you as Republic TV people have done many investigations earlier. Shaban has taken the lead in many of them. I believe that this is of such a nature that where an independent media investigation alternatively also should not be a problem and should be initiated by Republic TV. Because when an independent free press does it, it does it purely from a reportage perspective, purely from enlightening its viewers' perspective, rather than any of the other frills that go with a regulatory regime that, I have to comply with the law, I have to do this, it has to be done in a particular manner, it has to be done in a procedure prescribed by the law. Alternatively, when it comes to a media channel, when it does its investigation, it does it in a way that, I need to get to the bottom of the truth. And that is ultimately what prevails at the end of the day. Whereas, I'm not saying that SEBI will not try to get down to the bottom of the truth, but there are regulatory constraints, there are procedural constraints. And if there is any departure from the procedure, then, in law, as what we call it, is that any evidence which is pointed out becomes the fruit of a poisonous tree.
The Supreme Court today delivered its judgment on a bunch of petitions seeking an investigation into allegations of accounting fraud and stock manipulation against Adani Group companies published in a research report by US short seller Hindenburg Research in January 2023. Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud pronounced the verdict in the case that was reserved on the 24th of November after the conclusion of the arguments. Now, the top court said that it cannot enter into the domain of the regulatory regime and that the report by Hindenburg or anything like that cannot become the basis of a separate probe. It also directed Securities and Exchange Board of India to go ahead and continue its probe as per the law. In a major relief for the Adani Group, this has come out as a major group for the Adani group of companies, major relief for the Adani group of companies. Let's listen into what Advocate Vishal Tiwari has to say to the same.
एसआईटी बनाने की मांग हमारी याचिका में नहीं थी, अन्य किसी याचिका में होगी तो उससे हमारा कोई संबंध नहीं है। एसआईटी अपने आप सेबी द्वारा बनाई गई थी और वो उस पर इन्वेस्टिगेशन कर रही है। और हाल ही में सेबी की जो स्टेटस रिपोर्ट दी गई उसमें 22 इन्वेस्टिगेशंस कंप्लीट कर ली गई हैं, 2 आर पेंडिंग। तो 2 पर भी सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने 3 महीने का टाइम दिया है कि इनको कंप्लीट करें। तो सेबी द्वारा ऑलरेडी एसआईटी की गई है और वो अपनी इन्वेस्टिगेशन कर रही है, उसमें हस्तक्षेप का कोई अभी जो है ग्राउंड नहीं बनता।
After this verdict of the Supreme Court on this very important and very controversial and popular case, the Adani Group chairman Gautam Adani has said that it lauds Supreme Court's verdict that rejected the demand of a bunch of petitioners demanding an independent probe into the allegations levelled against the conglomerate in a report by US-based Hindenburg Research. Now, Adani also said that the group's contribution towards India's growth will continue after this big hurdle has been overcome. In this judgment that Supreme Court delivered today, it clearly said that when SEBI has been taking a stock of situation and is into the investigation, which was launched on the basis of Hindenburg Short Seller Company's report, which is a US-based company alleging malpractices against the Adani Group of companies. Now, with this verdict, Gautam Adani, the chairman of Adani Group, has said that Satyamev Jayate, this is the victory of the truth, and that how he lauds the Supreme Court's verdict on the same. The Supreme Court also said that the government of India and the SEBI will look into this matter and no SIT is needed for the same. And as Gautam Adani also lauded the Supreme Court's verdict, the 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court also held that it found no ground to transfer the investigation from SEBI to an SIT in the Adani-Hindenburg case. Now,
The court also said that it is limited in its powers, and the allegations by the Hindenburg short sellers, the US-based company, should also be investigated, which is also a very important aspect to put the complete picture in clear light to understand this thing. Now, this has come as a major relief for Gautam Adani and the Adani group of companies, which are involved in a lot of developmental and infrastructure related projects of India, and also are contributing to the Viksit Bharat 2047 vision that India has set to achieve. Now, this is a major big relief, viewers, I would repeat. And the court also said that the regulations do not suffer from any infirmities. And further, they added that SEBI has completed investigation in 20 out of 22 matters, as there were 22 petitions against the Adani group. And taking that into account, the assurance of Solicitor General, the Supreme Court has directed SEBI to complete the investigation in other 2 cases within the next 3 months. Now, so the new year has started on a good note for the Adani group of companies, as this verdict of Supreme Court comes as a major relief, where they have also said that the allegations, the report, in fact, of Hindenburg short sellers should also be investigated, and all the angles and leads also must be taken into account, because as India looks forward to becoming a developed country and has the vision of Viksit Bharat 2047, this company has played a very important role in the infrastructural development of our country. So a thorough investigation has been ordered in the same, and also Gautam Adani has hailed the verdict of Supreme Court, saying Satyamev Jayate. For more on this, we have Yamini Agrawal with us, a very renowned economist, and she is joining us live from New Delhi. Yamini, a very good morning to you. Now, this is a major relief for the Adani group of companies, and Supreme Court has said that no separate team needs to be constituted when SEBI is already involved in this case, where 20 out of 22 of these petitions have already been taken account of, and Supreme Court has also given 3 more months to wrap up this case. So, Yamini, what do you have to say to this verdict of Supreme Court today? All right, viewers, I think there is some problem with the line, and probably Yamini is not able to listen to me clearly. While what we are talking about here is that a major relief has come for the Adani group of companies in the case, which was allegedly in Hindenburg short seller, US-based short selling company in January 2023 had accused the Adani group of companies of malpractices. And a case was going on, and it was moved to India, and now Supreme Court in the latest verdict today has said that SEBI is good to go with this case against Adani Group.